So what would happen if you actually ignored this sign right here? That's what we're going to talk about today. Let's cue the intro and get right into it. Welcome to the channel. My name is Howard and this is the Heckshot 87 channel. It's good to have everybody here, man. If you like this type of content, consider subscribing to the channel. Drop me a like, share it with your friends, because we're going to talk about some stuff here that is specific to my state, but also can be a broad overview. And let me go ahead and say that I am not a lawyer. I am not giving you legal advice, and I'm not telling you to break the law. I'm simply giving you my opinion on this hot button topic. So these signs right here are actually super specific, at least in South Carolina. I'm sure it's like this pretty much everywhere, you know, if you're in a free state, but these signs have to be like almost set perfectly. Otherwise, I think they're null and void. Now, this is just from South Carolina, but check this out. I'm going to read it off because there's a lot here. But you must post a sign that is clearly visible from the outside of the building. It must be at least 8 inches wide and 12 inches tall. It's got to state no concealable weapons allowed, in black 1-inch tall uppercase letters at the bottom of the sign and centered between the lateral edges of the sign. Sorry. It must show a black silhouette of a handgun inside of a circle 7 inches in diameter with a diagonal line that runs from the lower left to the upper right. Lower left to the upper right. At a 45-degree angle. Think Ghostbusters. This is a good website, by the way, I found. Must be placed between 40 and 60 inches from the bottom of the building's entrance door. If the place does not have doors, which would be weird, check with a lawyer to make sure the size and all that requirements are met. So it's got to be pretty much perfect, or from what I understand, it is null and void. Regardless, if all these stipulations are met and you walk into a place of business, which is what we're going to start with, at least in South Carolina, essentially what they can ask you to do is leave or trespass you from the property. Now, this can be followed up with up to 30 days in jail and or a $200 fine. Having a second or third offense in that place of business can have your concealed carry permit revoked for up to a year. Now, the question I ask is, if you're going into a place of business that has one of these signs, how is anybody going to know unless you're printing all over the place that is so obvious to everybody around you that they're able to call you out? Or you actually have to use that firearm in self-defense, and then obviously everybody's going to know. Now, I would hope as a business owner that had that sign, let's say you have to use that gun in self-defense. Let's say you save almost all or all of the people inside that establishment from an active shooter situation. You are able to take that shooter down and save the lives of so many people. I can almost guarantee you that there's examples of people still being charged by the owners of the establishment because they feel so strongly about it, but I'm sure there's cases of the other side of that where the business owner was like, dude, I really appreciate you saving my patrons and actually standing up for, you know, random people around you. You know, whenever I see these signs, it really just depends on where I'm going, okay? There's some other examples I'm going to give you here where I actually do remove my gun. But when it comes to just a place of business, if I'm going to be active in there, like for example, we rode go-karts like, you know, a month ago or something, right? And so there's a chance of the Sherp flying up and there's kids around and stuff. And although I didn't like it, I actually did remove my gun and I kept it in my motorcycle, locked it up, okay? There's other examples where it's a clothing store or something like that. In my opinion, what I do is sometimes you just have to take that chance because it's more of a risk to you, or could be a potential risk to you, to not have that gun than the risk of actually being trespassed from the property. So really, it's a personal decision. If every time you see that sign, you take off your gun, well, I'm not going to fault you for that. But what I will say is maybe carry a tape measure around with you and measure these things out. Make sure they're in compliance, because if they're not, like I said, That sign doesn't mean anything to you and you can walk on through. Now, that's in private businesses that are open to the public. What about schools? Now, this is a hot button topic, and schools, we protect everything in our society with guns, including ex-presidents and banks and you know, all these kind of places. We protect them with guns, except for our most precious assets. I'll digress, but I still think it's really dumb. Obviously, the Gun-Free Zone School Act of 1990, they have this weird thing where there's like 1,000-foot bubble around the school. Now, this imaginary bubble does nothing, obviously, to keep intruders and would-be attackers out. And unfortunately, we've seen that time and time again, where these gun-free zones are literally targets of sick individuals willing to take the lives of young children, high schoolers, whatever the case may be. Regardless, this 1,000-foot bubble doesn't include private property. So there's a good article from the USCCA, and so let's say you're within 1,000 feet of the school, but you're on, you know, your buddy's, you're at your buddy's house, and they live within 1,000 feet of the school. Well, you know, that's their property. So as long as you have permission from the owner of the home, the other homeowner, then you are able to have your gun on the premises. But if you walk on the sidewalk heading towards the school, then you're not. There's also examples like if you're within 1,000 feet of a school and you're on public property, you can have a gun as long as it's unloaded and locked in a container, or if there's some kind of school-approved program, you know, maybe I don't know, maybe it's a police agency coming to talk to the kids, but you know, it's still, I guess, should be, you know, unloaded and locked in a container or locked in your vehicle or whatever. There's exceptions to this rule. If you don't follow these things, that is a punishable crime. It's a felony to actually do that. So private property and public property. And when I'm thinking about schools in my area, there's actually like a Tastee-Freez across from one of the schools in my area. And so I can't tell you, you know, how many times I've been on public property, or it's private property open to the public, I have no idea, whatever. Gone through the drive-thru and I always have my gun on me, so would that mean that I was breaking the law in that instance? I don't know. This imaginary 1,000-foot bubble around schools is so ridiculous, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but maybe there's somebody out there that doesn't think, you know, there should be armed security or armed trained teachers in schools. But let me tell you, man, this 1,000-foot imaginary buffer between the school and the outside world and some of the sick people that are willing to harm the kids in that school is ridiculous. We should eliminate them altogether as far as gun-free zones and get people that are trained inside of these schools to protect our most cherished asset in this country. The last thing we'll talk about is like the post office or courthouses or anything like that where it's like federal grounds. Now, this is really interesting because like specifically with the post office, you can't even be on the grounds. You can't even be in the parking lot with a gun at all. Whether it's locked in your glove box or in your center console, you're a concealed carry holder or you're not, you can't be on the grounds at all with a firearm. And so this is also a punishable crime. It's a felony with super stiff fines as well. So this is another like judgment, right? It's a personal call when it comes to all of these things. What about concealed carry at your place where you work, right? If you get permission from the business owner, you should be good to go. What if they say no? I've been in this position when I first got my concealed carry gun. And I've told y'all the story, you know, of my holster coming apart because I didn't Loctite the screws and, you know, the hardware came apart and my boss came in, you know, right after I got all the hardware picked up. You know, sometimes you almost have to take a chance to be able to protect yourself. This place I worked was in a bad area of town. The clientele was not the nicest sometimes, right? And so it, to me, you know, especially working late night, it was worth the risk that I took even though I didn't have permission. Let's say you're a restaurant worker, man. I can't believe, you know, when I worked at a restaurant, this was way before I ever started concealed carrying. But man, there would be times where I got out of there at midnight, 1 o'clock, sometimes 2 o'clock, depending on what I was doing. And there's so many places around the restaurant where people can hide. Actually, Jen was robbed at knife point when she was 8 or 9 months pregnant. She used to work at the same restaurant. So she opened up one morning and there was somebody hiding in the bush. And as soon as she opened the door, he came up behind her, put a knife to her stomach, and she actually had to go to the office. The deposit, somebody had hidden it the night before. They didn't actually deposit the money into the bank like they should have. They hid it somewhere, and where they normally put it if they don't deposit, it wasn't there. Fortunately, the guy took what was out of the register and left. There's situations that I was in at the same restaurant, different location, where there was woods behind this establishment, right? And so now there's a gas station there, but those woods, man, was such a prime target for would-be robbers and criminals. And one time they took advantage of that. A guy had walked out the back door. We had just closed, and I actually watched this on camera the next morning. I wasn't there to close, but regardless, he had walked out to his car, started it up, and criminals came in behind him. There was actually 2 doors. There was a door to go into the bathroom and then a door to go into the back of the establishment. They made him seem like, hey man, just open up the door, I'm coming back inside. They followed him in, made everybody get down on the ground, and ended up robbing the store. That owner of that establishment, I can guarantee you, would have said, no concealed carry guns allowed. But that situation could have turned out a lot worse if somebody didn't have a concealed carry gun. In that situation, it wasn't necessary for anybody to pull a gun. You know, that's the store's money, right? And so at that point, it's not worth your life. But if things could have escalated, having a concealed carrier on the property could have saved lives there. And so that's where it comes down to, man. It is a personal decision for every single one of you. And so you know that carrying into a gun-free zone is a risk to you. And the whole idea is this is the great equalizer. This allows men and women alike to be equal. And even the sight of a gun can deter a would-be intruder to your person, to your property, and everything else. So I think it's a personal decision. I am not going to tell you that every time I see one of those signs, I turn around and put my gun back in. There have been times, but more times than often, that sign is not worth the risk I'm taking when I go into an establishment. Because let's be honest, man, gun-free zones just don't work. And unfortunately, we've seen this time and time again. I'd love to hear your opinion on this topic, man. How do you treat gun-free zones? How do you treat this sign right here? Let me know down below, man. If you like what I do, you can support us through Patreon. We are heavily supported from our viewers right here, man. I'll leave a link down below, $1, $2, whatever, man. We actually have some pretty cool tiers over there. Big thanks to you guys. See you in the next one. And as always, hold it down.